let's rank every boss in Aberrus the Shadowed Crucible raid. This ranking is based on enjoyment, not just difficulty. I'll have a quick list based only on difficulty at the end of this video. So you understand my viewpoint, I have completed the raid in every single role, and my main is an AOTC tank. So that is the primary focus you're getting with this list. But before we jump into my list, let's take a look at what you, the viewers, chose as your most and least favorite bosses of Aberrus the Shadowed Crucible raid. Number 3, Rashok. Number 2, The Forgotten Experiments. And number 1 most disliked raid boss, the Assault of the Zakali. So what about the top 3 most liked? Number 3, the Echo of Neltharion. Number 2, Rashok. Seems like y'all like and hate this guy equally. And the number 1 most liked Aberrus raid boss is Sarkareth. Now let's see how this rates with my own list. Number 9, Magma Rocks. Not only is this the easiest boss in the raid, it's one of the most forgettable. The biggest positive here is that Magma Rocks has a really cool looking boss model, and his arena is also pretty cool. It's also pretty neat seeing him swimming, circling the raid while you clear out the trash. However, aside from that, nothing here is really memorable. It's basically a tank and spank boss. Magma Rocks fits perfectly in the last ranking on this list. Number 8, The Forgotten Experiments. This is one of the more challenging boss fights in this raid. I think the boss models look pretty cool as they do somewhat look like experiments. I like how each boss has different mechanics. Positioning is the most important aspect of this entire fight, and each boss is pretty chaotic. However, the main dislike here is with the second and third boss. This is where the chaotic gets to the point of being difficult to actually see what's happening. One of my biggest issues with WoW is the ability to see mechanics and the clashing colors. The Forgotten Experiments falls victim to this and is why it's ranked so low. Number 7, Kasara. She's a solid entry boss to the Aberrus raid. Her model looks fantastic, and she's definitely a badass looking dragon. I just want to point out a few abilities here that really make this fight enjoyable. The Dreadrift mechanic is a lot of fun and unique, and her Hellbeam attack looks completely badass. A super nice attention to detail. As her armor breaks off throughout the fight, her model actually shows less and less armor. Kasara was really close and could have been swapped with the next one on this list. Number 6, Skarm. This dude has a pretty badass looking set of armor. His arena is also pretty badass, with the dragon statues looking inward and the floor being broken into dragon scales. Skarn has one of my favorite boss arenas in this raid. The fight itself is very chaotic. Unfortunately, it does have some visibility issues, as multiple traps being activated and golems running around can make it difficult to see the bomb's location. Note, bombs are only on heroic difficulty. You won't know what that mechanic is if you're playing normal or LFR. However, I do feel as though it's manageable. Overall, it's a challenging but enjoyable fight, and I think he fits this spot perfectly. Number 5, Rashok. While the arena here is pretty bland, the boss model is top-notch and looks great. The boss's abilities are pretty cool and memorable. It's great to watch Rashok leap across the arena like he's Jordan. Not to mention that aside from the intermission, everything is easily seen and telegraphed. This is definitely one of the best executed boss fights of this expansion. Rashok sits comfortably in the middle of this list. Number 4, the Amalgamation Chamber. This is a super enjoyable fight. I really like how the first phase, fire and shadow elementals combine into one elemental with visual characteristics of both. Not only do the elemental models look great, but the combination also looks really great as well. Speaking of combining, the fire and shadow elemental attacks merge together for phase 2. This is, in my opinion, one of the best executed fights in the raid. The abilities are telegraphed, and it's easy to see what's happening. This would have been ranked closer to number 1, however, this is such an easy fight that it's extremely forgettable and therefore pushed down. Number 3, Sarkareth. I'm not a huge fan of the Dracthyr models, so I'm really not impressed with Sarkareth's first and second phase look. However, I do think phase 3 Sarkareth is a badass looking model. This is a very challenging fight that requires positioning and executing mechanics correctly. Even though it's the hardest fight of the entire raid, if you have a solid group, he can be down the first or second attempt. This is such a challenging and completely satisfying, well-earned victory that you will have your fist pumping even after the first kill. The main downside to this fight is that it greatly suffers visually. There is so much stuff going on that it is difficult to really see things that are happening. This unnecessarily adds an extra difficulty level. Blizzard had a mechanic-intensive fight with much easier to see visuals when they did Raszageth. I wish they had transferred that same style to Sarkareth. It was hard for me to rank Sark this high, and honestly, I would have ranked him closer to the bottom. However, the feeling of downing this guy on heroic is such a dopamine hit that I couldn't bring myself to lower it. Number 2, Assault of the Zakali. Talk about chaotic, but it's such a fun chaotic. The first part has ads scaling the walls, trying to reach the door. You can grab rock pieces and throw them down the wall to help control the amount of ads you're dealing with. This fight has my nostalgia screaming, remembering Lord of the Rings, the Helm's Deep battle. Then you have Warlord Cagney himself, who looks like a total badass. This battle is just so fun that I'm willing to overlook how easy of a boss battle this is, and rank it securely as the second best boss battle in the Aberrus raid. So the number 1 boss battle inside of the Aberrus raid belongs to the Echo of Neltharion. Now, in my opinion, this is and should have been the final boss of the raid, but I get that the story was more focused on Sarkareth. Anyway, this is the second most difficult boss and requires the raid to focus on positioning and mechanics in order to be successful. Even though this is a difficult battle, it doesn't suffer as much visually like Sarkareth. A majority of the important abilities are visible and telegraphed. While the arena looks bland, once the rock walls are forming and present, I think it helps elevate it a little. Neltharion himself, nothing really to say other than that he looks like a badass. Neltharion easily takes the cake for being the best boss in the Aberrus raid. Very quickly, going to rank the bosses in terms of difficulty, easiest to hardest. Starting with the easiest, Magmarox, then Kasara, the Amalgamation Chamber, Rashok, the Assault of the Zakali, Skarn, the Forgotten Experiments, Neltharion, and finally the most difficult boss being Sarkareth himself. So there you have it. Let me know what you think is the most fun, the least fun, the easiest, and the hardest. Throw it down in the comments. I read and respond to every one of them. If you watched to the end, please hit the thumbs up. It truly helps out my channel so that I can continue making content. If you like WoW content, consider subscribing to the channel. I have guides, tips and tricks, podcasts, and more. Secret stuff available on my Patreon and channel memberships. Live streams happen here on YouTube and Kick. Links to everything are down below. I'll see you in the next one.